Hey everyone, James Azar here with CyberHub Engage. Welcome back to another exciting session in our virtual summit. Yes, virtual. I used to do a podcast because I thought it'd be fun to talk to you guys. Now I got to do this stuff virtually because I can't hang out with you. It's kind of really ticking me off. I do miss kind of hanging out with our listeners and my peers and just talking. And so I brought someone to talk about something that a lot of us don't want to admit to, which is vulnerability management. It's one of those it's kind of like looked at as like the redheaded stepchild in our cybersecurity program. We have to love our step-headed red child, but we don't really want to love them completely. That's about vulnerability management. And joining me for our session today is a very good friend of mine, Scott Kuffer. He is the co-founder and COO at Nucleus Security. Scott, welcome to the virtual summit.
Oh, thanks, James. I'm so happy to be here. And, I have to admit, it's always fun to hang out with you in a virtual setting or personal setting as well. So gotta make the best.
I prefer personal, right? Like I'm such I'm glad I went to RSA because I got to experience a little bit of that.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
But RSA was empty this year. It's one of those.
I brought a lot of hand sanitizer to RSA this year. We shook hands with a lot of people, and I have to admit, we can't clink beers together through the virtual summit, but we have to do the best with what we have.
Yeah, we sure do until this is all over and we can start to kind of not social distance ourselves. I think this whole idea of social distancing is just really awkward, especially for cyber folks.
Oh yeah, I've never been super good at talking to people anyway, and so as an introvert it's kind of nice, but at the same time you realize that hey, you're only so introverted. You do like to talk to people.
Well, I think the one thing that people I think misunderstand about security is while you could have a lot of introverts in security, teamwork is the essence of a good security program.
Absolutely.
And so introverts ends up becoming extroverts within their own introvert community.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think you and I are case in point to that one right there. I talk to people so much now, whereas, I started out just behind a computer coding and I used to be a code monkey, so.
Yeah, so I get it. I honestly I'm looking at this and I'm just in my mind I'm ready for quarantine to be over. I'm ready for us to move forward. I'm ready to meet and hang out and do exercises and different tabletops with people in the room and not running them virtually, and just having discussions, round tables, and like you said, hanging out. And we can always talk. We can probably spend a few hours talking about what this really means from a COVID from a quarantine perspective. I think one of the things we really want to talk about, and guys, this session is a practitioner session. If you're listening, this is the session. As Scott and I were planning this session out together, vulnerability management, oftentimes not done as extensively. And there's a lot of challenges with it. We're going to talk about those, but the idea of vulnerability management is, and now in the era of COVID-19 for everyone listening and watching, is there's so many challenges that exist with it. A lot of organizations, a lot of CISOs have had to deal with managing vulnerabilities a lot of times with having to plug into a machine when someone can't get to the machine. And so it's created a slew of security challenges for a lot of organizations. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a lot about what we can do as practitioners to really get this thing going forward. So, but Scott, I want you to set the baseline for us, if you don't mind. Okay. Sure. So whenever I talk about the new cyber paradigm, I like to kind of, this is living content. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, some kid's going to be doing research on COVID-19 cybersecurity, and I want them to fall on and vulnerability management, and I want them to fall on this, video and watch it. And I want them to understand a little bit, what was vulnerability management pre-pandemic?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of the funny part about this industry is it's not like we were doing vulnerability management great before COVID-19. And so COVID-19 is only making it worse, right? It was not like we had these crazy mature vulnerability management programs. I mean, SANS just published a real vulnerability management maturity model this year, like 3 weeks ago. And we're talking in April of 2020. So, I mean, vulnerability management, like you said, is been neglected for a really long time. And so what the traditional process really was is this disjointed kind of, you've got all these different tools that are trying to do different pieces of this vulnerability management process. Everybody calls themselves vulnerability management, but they don't really do every piece of that puzzle. And so no organization does the entire process well. I mean, I'm sure there's a couple out there that are, and if you are, good job. You're not the norm. But I mean, traditional vulnerability management at this point is we have some vulnerability scanners. We throw it on a subnet because our entire network is internal. So we're relying on the scanning tools to kind of discover our assets. We're basically just grabbing these lists of vulnerabilities. We're throwing them in Excel, basically pushing them out to the appropriate parties through ticketing systems. Sometimes, generally it's email chains, SharePoint drives, etc. And so that's really what we're dealing with from a large enterprise and just even regular kind of mid-sized enterprise perspective is this kind of disjointed process that relies very heavily on people being internal to the network to actually do the vulnerability management. So, get the right information to the right people, to share the right information with the right people, to actually run patches, to actually figure out their attack surface is very heavily reliant on the internal network and being at the office. And so that's kind of the shift that we're seeing with COVID-19 is kind of a shift away from that towards a more distributed network of kind of security in general.
Yeah, the one thing COVID-19 has done for a lot of practitioners is really kind of spiced up our thought process in remote login, remote work. Because security folks, the only remote stuff you were really doing, it wasn't on the network. It was predominantly, emails, work. Very few people were doing remote work, remote security work from not within the existing network, just simply because of the security and the framework and the risk perspective of it. We were forced into this thing. And as we look at it, now that we are forced into this, we're speaking today is April 17th. This is going to air in a few days, and people will be listening to this for years and years and years to come. There's this inherent thing of how has vulnerability management really changed in the last month, and what are some of the key challenges that organizations are going through with this?
Yeah, so I think it really all revolves around the whole distribution of remote work, right? I mean, before there's kind of it's a lot of the challenges that you have with vulnerability management have been exacerbated by the move to remote work, right? And it's a bigger IT problem as well as a security problem. But where we're really seeing it is that organizations really need to start prioritizing their vulnerabilities differently, right? So I mean, before you basically throw your scanners at your systems and everything was internal, so it didn't really matter too much about kind of your asset context. But now, with all of your workers being remote, you've got all of these different avenues that you have to open up your internal network to so that they can go, log in and do what they need to do. And so we're seeing a huge increase in attack surface, and one of the neglected pieces of this whole process has always been asset management and discovering what assets you actually have out there, which ones are externally exposed. And so that's probably been the biggest challenge I think that we've seen is just this shift towards basically publicly exposing their networks and not really understanding what's actually out there. And they have no systems in place to actually figure out what is out there. So I'd say that's probably the biggest issue, and the biggest change has just been the attack surface.
Yeah, the attack surface is definitely different. I think the challenge with this, though, inherently, even as a CISO, is managing vulnerability management, right? It's really difficult to master vulnerability management for a lot of reasons. And a lot of it is you don't really control the systems that are vulnerable. They impact business differently. So how do you start to master it? What are some of the steps practitioners need to be paying attention to really get a better grip on vulnerability management?
Yeah, so that's one of the interesting problems that we always have to deal with as vulnerability management experts ourselves, right? So, and I think the biggest thing really is you need a shift in mindsets. to understand what vulnerability management actually means to your organization. So, I mean, if you're looking at vulnerability management, it's basically one of the kind of foundational cybersecurity practices, cyber hygiene, if you will, type activities that you need to do to assess your actual business risk. Because really what you're trying to do is minimize the risk to your business of a cyber event, right? And there's a lot of different ways to do that, but vulnerability assessments and management is the kind of core technical challenge of kind of reducing that risk. And so what people need to start thinking about is they need to think about it in that context of what are we trying to actually accomplish with vulnerability management. Most of the organizations that we work with, they think of vulnerability management as a check-the-box compliance type thing, where PCI tells us we need to do biannual scans or quarterly scans. Let's go do that, and we'll put together a report or hire an outside vendor to help us with that. We need to start thinking about it as a holistic process where we're basically trying to achieve certain goals, and we want to be able to achieve those with undertaking certain actions and basically in a cost-effective way. And so I think that this really process that we need to start thinking about is how we can start connecting the dots between all of our different tools, because everybody's using a variety of tools already. They've got scanners, they've got ITSM systems, they've got Splunks and the Syslogs of the world, but there's no way to actually share the information to effectively coordinate a response. And so I'd say that's the big thing, is kind of a shift of mindset. And I think that the industry is slowly catching up to that. But I mean, for the past 20 years, vulnerability management's been kind of a neglected field. So the biggest problem, I think, is kind of archaic thinking about what the purposes of vulnerability management are. So kind of an awareness thing, I guess, for the gist of it.
Well, I think a lot of what you say is correct, is that there are inherent challenges in mastering, vulnerability management. A lot of it has to do, though, with business, right? And
Sure.
and different business functions, and also different supports of different systems. I mean, we always like to talk about patching, right?
Oh, yeah.
But, patching is inherently risky because it tends to break other things that can impact business.
For sure.
And so, kind of looking at that, how do you start to weigh in patching and vulnerability management, right, to business, especially now, right? Systems are critical right now. I mean, when you think of healthcare organizations, government, municipalities, first responders, there's just an overload on all those people, right?
Yep.
We saw early on in COVID-19 ransomware attacks on food delivery services in Europe. So people weren't able to get food, again, and that was unpatched. A lot of that ransomware was unpatched, different plugins and apps within a website or an application.
Yep.
It's inherently difficult to do this. And, we can always point the finger and say we should do it better. We ignore it. I think a lot of times it's what do you feel like the right combination is between maybe, AppSec and DevOps and security when it comes to patching? What's that equilibrium of success look like?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I mean, that's something we deal with all the time. Just because, I mean, like you said, patching is inherently risky, and it's only become more important recently. But I mean, if you think about it this way, it's like a lot of people, when they think patching, they think, oh, Windows updates, workstation updates, or what have you. But the reality of where the real challenges of patching come into play are, you've got all of these, you've got 60 DNS servers that are basically running your AD environment. And so you don't want to auto patch those or just have those kind of go on a per monthly basis. You need to actually have a change management and process in place to manage those, because you don't want the lights to go out and not come back on, right? And so I would say where the good kind of vibe there between all three of those is a prioritization perspective, right? So you need to really think about what is important and what are your critical assets to your infrastructure. So you need to identify those, figure out what can you not live with going down, and then also you need to look at what's actually externally exposed. And we kind of recommend in this day and age right now, and we've actually seen a shift towards this, is focusing on everything that's externally exposed to the internet, right? So whether that's your AppSec, you've got code and web apps out there, you've got microservices out there, containers. It's really focusing on which of those assets are being accessed, are critical, and are externally exposed, and prioritizing in that way. It tends to be that's at least what we've seen, and that's kind of the way that the direction I'd say the industry is going right now.
So you brought up a really good kind of example here, which is, kind of like the patching priorities that need to change now that we are in remote work. Now we are seeing those priorities a little bit change, where people are more concerned. They're patching their VPNs.
Yep.
They're more concerned with that. They're patching their endpoint security greater. They're starting to patch their Microsoft stuff much greater. I mean, this week was Patch Tuesday. We saw a bunch of patches come out, not as much as we saw earlier this year, but a respectable amount. Do you feel like this is the new trend in patching, meaning the new remote work patching priorities is going to be, the VPN, because remote work it's not going away, right? I mean,
for sure.
You and I can agree that people are going to be working from home for the next few years. Organizations are going to start looking at, minimizing their real estate, because you don't need it. And this whole concept of moving people from one state to another to be close to an office, I think is at this point almost goners. I don't think you have to do that.
I think that's pretty accurate, man. I mean, you look at the prevalence of Zoom happy hours now, and you'll know that people can have fun even without being in the same room. So I totally agree. Remote work has completely changed the way that networks and big businesses operate, because in our experience, a lot of the bigger businesses are going to be the ones that are affected most by this, because they have a very big butt in seat mentality in terms of like, our workers need to be in-house, we need to have offices for them, we need our big cubicle farm to know that we have our managers watching them. And so we're actually seeing a shift basically in the big organizations like that. I mean, there's some that are, you've got giant buildings that are staffed at 10% of their norm, and so they're huge overhead costs, and we're realizing that people can work from home. So I kind of got off track there, so I apologize. But
no, you're fine. I mean, listen, the point of virtual summits, and we're people, and we can't just talk about one topic without really addressing the inherent things around that one topic that change everything. The move to the cloud is now at a great, I mean, you and I were talking the other day, I think it was yesterday, and one of the things you mentioned was, hey, Azure is out of space in Europe.
They're just being tapped out. You're not able to scale up. You're seeing applications crashing because the load balancers just aren't working. It's crazy. I mean, we're to a point where a cloud provider has run out of space.
That cloud provider being Microsoft. You got to point that out.
It's absolutely crazy. It's an insane thing. Like, there's all of these things that I don't know that if people are paying attention to, but I mean, I feel like the strain on the internet right now is pretty crazy. And there's got to be dumpster fires somewhere where people are just fire extinguishers on racks trying to keep the lights on in the whole world. And it's just like, it's crazy what is actually occurring right now from an infrastructure perspective.
So very interesting. In this virtual summit, for those that are watching now, one of our earlier sessions was with Mark Haupt. He's the Chief Information Security Officer for DataBank, a good friend of the show. We did our State of the Union together before COVID-19 in Dallas with our very, very good friend Patrick Benoit. Shout out to Patrick. Love you, Pat. I hope you guys are staying safe in Dallas. And one of those. One of our discussions in that earlier session was around the workload in this new cyber paradigm, how data centers are having to readjust their workloads, how these, microprocessors, these they call them blades, right? Servers are now called blades. And, you think of a large server. When we did our State of the Union, we did a CISO roundtable that evening. At DataBank's facility just outside of Dallas. And we were touring the facility after the roundtable, and you see these blades, and these blades can process 10 times faster than a typical server used to. And they're so small, they're so tiny, but their computing power is unbelievable. Technology's there. It's just a matter of scaling up and getting those parts. And part of that has to do with supply chain. Right?
Yeah.
We can't ignore vulnerability management as part of supply chain.
100%.
Right? I mean, it's part of your supply chain. You can't plan against it.
Oh yeah, no, you really can't. And the thing is, it's kind of crazy because vulnerability management is like this. It's like this conglomeration of everything, right? Everything that's going on, because it really does align very well with overall business risk. It's kind of a subcategory of business risk in some sense, right? And so not being able to get the hardware you need is also a vulnerability, right? really you're trying to achieve your, CIA triad or whatever it is that they call it now. I know they're always constantly updating those, but availability is a big part of this, right? And a big part of it too is if people are scaling up so wildly kind of externally and throwing a bunch into basically, I would say they're moving faster and faster into the cloud. They don't even know what's out there, right? So are we even scanning the right stuff? We don't even know.
You don't know what, how you're sitting on the cloud, what buckets you could be using, what containers, how you're setting it up, the different permission levels. I hear there's 5,000 ways to do encryption, but there's only about a handful of ways to do it right. And and when I send out my third-party due diligence, cyber due diligence checklist for organizations, I love when I hit the encryption part where they go, yes, we encrypt in transit, at rest. We use AES 256, and then you ask them, okay, show me your encryption policy, your key management policy, and they go, what? Key management, what? And you're like,
so we just use an AWS encryption key for that. Okay, cool.
Yeah, great. Bravo. You just want to clap. But folks, as we talk about vulnerability management, for those watching, as practitioners, we have to understand vulnerability management isn't just patching your Apache struts. Shout out to Equifax.
Equifax.
or any other system. It's about overall managing your security program. That's vulnerability management, really, right? It's managing your keys correctly for your encryption. Yep. It's managing your systems. It's managing your business. There's so many aspects of it. Your physical security, it's part of your vulnerability management.
Oh yeah, somebody gets a USB drive in your system. I mean, you're as good as giving somebody just here, take the keys.
So I will tell you a very interesting aspect of that. You brought that up. It's kind of off topic, but since we're having a great conversation, why change it, right? So I don't know if you've seen it. Have you seen this new thing where people are trying to go away from passwords, right? So the whole mission is hackers access us because they can get passwords. So what if people didn't have to remember passwords? What if passwords were authenticated differently, right?
Yeah, you're talking about like the whole. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. There's like a Google initiative that's out there.
There's a Google initiative. There's a Microsoft initiative.
Yeah.
So the Microsoft initiative with one of those organizations, and I forgot what it is. It's a little USB port that you go in and you stick your fingerprint on it, and it authenticates that it's you. And so I looked at that really funny, and I was sitting in a room full of CISOs, and one of the companies that produced that product, I won't say who it was in the room. And so he was pitching it, and he goes, your employees will never have to use a password ever again because they just plug in this USB and they scan their fingerprint and voila, they're in the system.
Good to go. Yeah.
And so I go, so you want me to disable my USB ports so that I can enable no passwords for Office 365? So I'm getting rid of one attack vector and launching another one, and that one's worse than this one.
Yeah, well, it's funny, man. I mean, it goes back to the basics, right? It's every vendor wants to chase the new cool stuff. I think we went to a conference like 6 months ago or 8 months ago. They were like, 7-factor authentication. And it's like, okay, dude, really? I mean, there's 7 of the same factor, right? It's a password and a PIN number and whatever, an email address. Like,
and we inherently understand that multi-factor authentication, if you're not using an authentication app, you're not secure.
Right. Yeah.
Intercepting SMS is now standard, especially for the people who spread COVID-19. Before COVID-19, one of the stories we were actually looking at CyberHub Engage was how, in fact, some of the Chinese APTs, some of their new TTPs included the ability to hijack SMSs before they reach the phones for MFA, for multi-factor authentication. So use an authenticator app. Everyone's got one. Google has one. It's absolutely free. You can use it. Palo Alto's, a bunch of companies have them.
Yep.
Everyone's got their own authentication app. A lot of your endpoint providers have an authentication app. Use those over a cell phone. And it also gives you better control from a security perspective.
Sure.
An authenticator gives you so much more control. Kind of going back to a little bit about vulnerability management, though, what's the right model for vulnerability management in this new cyber paradigm? In the new cyber paradigm, where what we're talking about right now is more people are going to start working remotely. They're going to be all over the country. Companies are investing millions and millions, if not billions of dollars right now.
Yep.
In that transition to the cloud and that transition to remote work. Until there's a vaccine, we're not really going to see businesses come back to a full drumming office. Non-essential personnel, people who are at risk that have inherent health conditions are going to still, even, yesterday, President Trump's kind of, opening America again was all about people who are inherent in that risk group should not come to work, shouldn't even leave their house. They should remain in quarantine. They should remain at home, and their employers should respect that. And there's talks about, introducing a temporary bill that would make it illegal to fire an employee who has to be under quarantine because of health risks. So, I mean, what's the right model right now for all of this, Scott?
Yeah. Well, so that's a tough one because, I mean, we're just seeing in just the pure decrease of patching, right? So we work with a lot of big organizations across the world that do vulnerability management because that's kind of, we specialize in that, right? But what we're seeing across our customers is just a complete decrease in the actual emphasis on vulnerability management, which is kind of shocking in a sense because everybody's obviously just trying to shift to fully remote workforce. And so they're diverting most of their resources from kind of vulnerability management and patching and doing the management of the data to just trying to have remote management of laptops and purchase, remote VPN services and things like that. And so what we're seeing is a complete decrease in kind of I'd say the importance of vulnerability management to some of these bigger organizations, which is kind of funny because they're simultaneously increasing their attack surface. They're increasing all of the opportunities to be breached, and to basically you've got all these extra services that you're trying to implement them very quickly. So you all haven't vetted them through your traditional process of onboarding a new vendor, and so it's opening you up to a lot of risk. And so I think first off, like the proper model is just to kind of sit back and take a deep breath, go back to the basics. I think the SANS vulnerability maturity model does a great job of kind of outlining. It's not perfect, obviously, but it does a good job of saying, hey, these are like the 5 areas you should focus on, and just try to get to like a basic level of maturity in each one of those areas. So anything from discovery of your infrastructure to prioritization of the vulnerabilities. Make sure you're scanning everything correctly and appropriately. And you don't have to do it every day, but you need to understand what your actual risk is. You need to have visibility into what actually potentially could occur. And you need to have some sort of plan of action to glue that whole thing together so you can automate some of the response, right? Because a big thing is we need to automate as much of this process as we can. Because, I mean, there's a reason that nobody likes to do vulnerability management. It's because it's difficult, it's manual, it's tedious. But if you can start automating some of that, then it becomes a much easier problem to solve, I think.
Yeah, I think the more automation that goes into and I think as we inherently see the shift in the cybersecurity space, right? As we see that shift in organizations now and people who are looking to solve cybersecurity challenges in this new era, the automation of updating and patching systems is going to be key.
Oh yeah.
And this green and blue environments are going to be key. The ability to patch a system that's kind of running in the background, that's kind of quietly, and making sure that all the perks, the horn still honks and the car still goes forward and drive and goes backwards and reverse, and then turning it on and then patching the other system and kind of starting that transition, which is really the right way to do vulnerability management, right? Is having the same environment multiple times over. Do you agree with that, or do you feel like?
Totally agree, and I think we can even extrapolate that out a step further, right? So we've mainly been focusing on network security, right? But let's kind of take a step back and kind of look at it from a holistic application security focus, which is we've seen a trend where applications are a bigger and bigger part of your risk to your organization. So they have more vulnerabilities. It's generally less regulated. There's not as much kind of compliance information around your compliance requirements around application security. And so you need a way to manage that data as well. And so you need to make sure that you understand where your risk is across the board, be able to normalize all of that data into one place so you can then actually make real decisions, right? So that's a big part of this problem too, is just being able to make a decision because you don't have the information necessary to do so.
Right. And a lot of times business is also weary of losing specific features in an older version, then so they don't want to patch it because they feel like they could lose a key component that maybe doesn't exist in a new in the patched version that could impact the performance of a specific business function within that technology piece.
Right.
And so and I think a lot of that comes down to just, technology grows rapidly. And like we're seeing now, right? People were building technological products on old systems. It was like the governor of New Jersey that came out and said he was like, COBOL, right? And you're like, what? Like, hang on, 2005 called.
Right, 1980.
We need COBOL developers. I could see like all the retirees that wrote COBOL called coming.
And
I can do this.
So this is totally off topic. But I was on Twitter the other day, and I saw that kind of a thread on one of the trending tweets of that, and there was somebody that made a comment that said, "Oh, I can finally go back to my dad and tell him it's his chance to save the world. He's 75 years old. It's your time, Dad. You can do it."
Hey, Dad, you've saved the world once during World War II. Come back and do it again now.
That's right. The Avengers. Let's get the band back together.
It's it'd be a really funny movie if that's exactly what happened, though. It'd be a great script. Can't
work an iPad, but he can throw some sweet COBOL code.
He sure can. And I mean that's the whole aspect of it. And I feel like we never learn from our mistakes, right? So just like people built stuff on COBOL and never changed it, people are now going to the cloud without really exploring the inherent risks, or are we using the right cloud provider? Are we using the right environments for the kind of data that we're storing? Or are we just throwing stuff out there to have access to it and then going on a multi-year project to fix it and never fixing it, never setting it up correctly? And I think that's one of the challenges in vulnerability management is a lot of times we're trying to put a Band-Aid over a gunshot wound.
Oh yeah,
but you got to get the bullet out. You got to stitch it up. A Band-Aid never cures a gunshot wound unless you're John Wick. Then that's a whole other story.
Hey, we all want to be John Wick.
But it's an inherent challenge if we look at it from a CISO perspective, right? So if we look at vulnerability management is a lot of times not even on a CISO's priority. I don't want to say CISOs overlook it because they don't. But a CISO is generally concerned with the direction of the security program, new stuff that goes on. Vulnerability management is typically tasked to, the blue team, the red team, the purple team, someone over there that's really in charge of doing it. And a lot of times those people really aren't intertwined within the other business units to really work effectively with vulnerability management. So how do we enhance that vulnerability management communication and effectiveness? Especially now.
Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting problem because, I mean, on the surface, it does seem like actually the CISO shouldn't be involved in vulnerability management and the management of that actual program, right? I mean, the CISO does have higher level abstraction business decisions to make. But where we fall short right now is that once it's delegated to the security team or a red team or a blue team or whatever it is, they just stop paying attention completely. And so the real problem is that they don't have visibility, and the security teams, I mean, and a lot of the organizations we work with, they're trying to glue together their information for, via PowerShell scripts and Excel worksheets and emails. And so the CISO, a lot of times will ask a question about vulnerability management to say, hey, we want to have some insight that we care about of our vulnerability data. And then the security team goes and they're like, all right, give us a week and a half. We'll get you that answer. And so there's this kind of just, there's a break in the communication from the capabilities of what the security team can actually provide from a vulnerability management perspective because of just the difficulty and I'd say some of the challenges around vulnerability management itself. And then the CISOs just don't have quick insight into actually what's going on to actually really factor it into their overall decision-making process. And then once it's delegated as well, there's no good way to collaborate across teams, right? So a vulnerability management security team might have they have all of this vulnerability data, but they're not the ones that are actually doing the patches, right? They have to delegate that to another team. And so how do they translate that as a priority to the IT teams? in an effective way and actually allow for collaboration. So that's where you need a platform. You need some sort of process where you can actually communicate, and where vulnerability management can be some sort of priority. And again, it all comes down to priority.
So let me push back on that for a second,
Sure.
right? Because you bring up a good point, but again, the people who typically run vulnerability management don't understand the importance of different systems to an organization.
Yep.
A lot of times, there's a saying in Hebrew, and some people who listen to the show will understand. It's called Rosh Gadol, Rosh Katan. Rosh in Hebrew means head. And there's a big head, Rosh Gadol, and there's a small head, Rosh Katan.
Yeah.
Most people in vulnerability management teams
the little heads,
are little heads. So they're going to see a vulnerability. They're going to task it to the right people. They're not quite going to understand how important it is. And a lot of times they'll put something that isn't because they'll see it somewhere, and they'll go into a Google, or they'll go into Splunk, or they'll go into a bunch of different systems to be like, oh wow, this is critical. And you're like, who's it critical for? Is it critical for our business, or is it critical because Citrix was critical for business?
Yep.
Everyone needed to take care of that.
100%.
But not every Microsoft update that's critical is critical to every business. It's critical because it just depends on how you're using that specific piece of technology and how important it is, and what data it's processing and what data it's containing. And there's not a system out there today. I can't think of one product or one solution out there today that helps identify and build a criteria that says, here's all your vulnerabilities, right? Here's all the data that's in every single one of those systems. Here's that data classification and that data importance. It's IP, it could be patent, it can be, work processes, it can be 500 things. And here's, why this is important. Now, here's its rating to the business, not from Microsoft, not from Adobe, not from Citrix, not from anyone else, from the business.
Yeah. So, question for you. I'm gonna ask you a question, and then I'll answer your question after I get your answer.
Oh wow, one of those. Okay,
cool. It's gonna be fun. So where do you normally get that asset data, right? The ratings of the asset criticality and the criticality to the business. What type of data is on there? Like, where is that data actually stored? Kind of in your experience.
Either in the CISO's head, or computer, or somewhere along the executive management team, somewhere between the CISO and the CIO. It's typically never delegated down. Exactly.
So what you obviously haven't. The reason I'm pushing back on this is because you obviously haven't used our product in a while, but because that's actually one of the big things that we do, right? Is we take vulnerability data from all of your scanning tools, we normalize it all together, and then we're actually integrating with asset inventory systems, asset discovery systems, to actually pull in the importance of different criteria for an asset, and we're overlaying that on top of the vulnerability rating. And then we're also, on the third part, we're actually allowing the users to go in and say which of those criteria is most important to us. So maybe publicly exposed is most important, maybe business criticality of the asset is most important, and then your risk rating is actually going to change based on that. And that's kind of one of the foundations of the way that we do our prioritization, is to actually give you that asset context, where you can bubble up and say, these 15 vulnerabilities out of our 20,000 are the ones that are actually, they need to be fixed right away because they're externally exposed, they're business critical, and it's sensitive data, and you've got a exploitable, there's a public exploit available for critical vulnerability on that system. And so I like to push back, and I know we like to have fun like that, where we challenge each other, but that's
no, I mean that's again, like I said, yeah, you're right. I haven't been able to really see your guys' platform, and you know what, for people watching, listening, that's okay. I mean, that's the whole point of doing this stuff. And the point is to push back. The point is to have a discussion. The point is to also have a real conversation, and, and that's part of it. And, I mean, that I think that's a challenge even for me as a CISO, right? Mm-hmm. And when I want to run vulnerability management as a virtual CISO for a few organizations that I work with now, it's difficult because when you're delegating it, I know, right? But the team doesn't always know.
They don't.
Yep. And a lot of times vulnerability management is kind of, it's given to the intern, the apprentice, the first year guy that's, the person who's just got started, just finished orientation, just got done training, and they're like, hey, you know what? Go do the bitch job of.
I was gonna say go run some Nessus scans.
Yeah, well, I say a bitch job, right? Go do the job that no one wants to do.
Life, man.
Yeah. Hashtag go patch.
That's right.
And they end up going to do it, and a lot of times, as they're kind of trying to manage it, they're weary of shaking any feathers in the process, right? So some end up in an email going back saying, hey, we can't patch this now. And then that never gets escalated back up. And I think that was one of the things with Equifax and a bunch of other breaches that I've studied is a lot of times the higher ups will see that and delegate it down, and it gets redelegated and redelegated and redelegated. And then it gets to that person, and the person on the bottom of the totem pole that's supposed to do the work goes, yeah, this is going to not exactly work well. It's going to need a bunch of stuff, and they kick it back up, and it never goes back up the chain. It typically dies somewhere. And that's one of the reasons why we see so many typical vulnerabilities get exposed by cyber criminals when they're attacking an organization. And if people just kind of comprehended that, understood it for a little bit more, and started processing it, and especially now, remote work.
Oh, it's
the
so
pushback. It's so much worse now because that water cooler conversation. One of the hardest parts, I think, I don't know what it's like for you, but for me, is not being able to talk to DevOps.
Yeah, that's a tough one, man. Because now everybody's on different schedules too, and it's crazy. But we've seen a big kind of disconnect between even just the product team and the development team that's used to working in the same space for the last 3 years, right? And so now nobody can talk to each other except setting up Zoom calls and other types of meeting invites. So it is a pain. But the thing that I love the direction this conversation is going, because we're really starting to get into the nuts and bolts of vulnerability management and some of the core issues, right? If the visibility issue and the accountability issue is, I would say, probably number one, and I would say the number one source of why breaches occur is because the losing of visibility from the upper level back down to the lower level and then back up to the upper level as needed. And so that's really one of the problems that we set out to solve originally. Even before it was prioritization, was we need to be able to say, we want that accountability to say a vulnerability was discovered, it was rated at this level from a C-suite member, it was delegated to this person, then it was delegated to that person, then it was delegated to this person, and then that person number 4 kicks it back up, it goes back up, it goes back up. And we want to maintain that whole link so you have that whole audit trail of everything that's occurred. The person at the low level knows why it was rated a certain level, and they know that they're expected to do this patch and this is why. And then if there's issues, they can kick it back up, and everything sort of seamlessly syncs together. And that's really one of the core issues of vulnerability management that everybody struggles with, because you lose it in emails, you lose it in Excel sheets, you lose it in SharePoint. You just can't track it there.
Right. For those listening and watching us right now, you can obviously comment on the side of this video with your best practices, how you guys are doing it. If you agree or disagree with what we say, you can call us idiots if you'd like. That's quite okay.
We love when you do that.
We do enjoy when people call us idiots, but don't just do it for the sake of it. If you're going to call us an idiot, you better back it up.
Tell me why.
Yeah, anyone can write idiot. Just so you guys know, don't be a Twitter troll.
My mom calls me that all the time. We need real evidence here.
But the thing about this is, for a lot of practitioners, I think there's an inherent within the business to now, especially in the era of remote work, to create almost a multi-unit team of patching and vulnerability management, where you have someone from DevOps and someone from IT and someone from AppSec and a few people from security and a few people from business that are inherently, that's the team, and these guys are empowered. They're the champions 100%. Of getting this stuff done. And if we're able to start to build those teams more and more and more, then we can utilize platforms better, we can increase accountability, and we can reduce our risk. And I think at the end of the day in cybersecurity, one of the things that we're doing for a lot of people watching is we stopped doing our daily cyber briefing for a while. And the reason we did that is because I didn't just want to highlight headlines anymore. I wanted to really do some practitioner stuff. And on May 4th, we'll be relaunching with some really, really cool stuff. But we're no longer looking to lay the blame. We really want to find the reason why stuff happens and bring front and center the basic blocking and tackling. And one of the first basic of blocking and tackling isn't just a VPN and an antivirus and a firewall. It's also vulnerability management. It's understanding, updating your systems, updating your computers. I mean, how many times do people not shut down their computers so that the automatic window updates actually happen?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, it's definitely an interesting time. I mean, it's one of those things where, again, I mean, we kind of hit on this earlier, but it's just sort of been a neglected field just because of the fact that nobody really wants to do it. The interns get to do it. They don't really want to ruffle any feathers because they just got there and then they leave and they move on before they, really become experts. They don't even know what they don't know. And so we have this kind of self-inflicted wound. It's like a cycle where we're basically just always getting the new people into vulnerability management, then they leave to go do something that's perceived as more fun, maybe like SOC analyst or pen tester, red team, purple team, that kind of stuff. And nobody really ever kind of takes the initiative. And I think the approach that you actually mentioned a couple minutes ago, where you basically have to nominate and empower people from different teams to actually make vulnerability management happen, is a great idea, right? Because inherently, with a larger organization, you've got different segments of your network, you've got different segments of your business. And so being able to say, hey, this team of people basically nominees from across different teams. Maybe it's the DevOps team, the IT team, and the security team that are the leads for this segment of our vulnerability management data, and being able to assign role-based access control, be able to build their own workflows is a huge part of that. And then by empowering people to actually take ownership, I think you get much better results. And then the trick is just to try to let the CISO be able to input and get the data out that he needs, right? So it's a great idea. It's difficult in practice because everybody's got a ton of other priorities, right? I mean,
right, but at the end of the day, it is the priority of the organization to manage risk, right?
100%. Yep.
And so we can't say that our main concern for our business is, we don't want to go through, we don't have time to make a committee on vulnerability management. Why not? Right? Yeah. How hard is it for these people to take an hour every 2 weeks to review the vulnerability report, delegate, and
make
set
a micro strategy
follow-ups?
for 2 weeks, right? It's not really that hard. It doesn't take that much time.
No, and the one thing I've noticed in this era of COVID-19, calls are shorter. They're far more effective. Mm-hmm. What used to be a 90-minute office meeting is now a 30-minute call. Yep. And
it's great.
Right.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
It's awesome. It's far more effective. And so it's far more effective. And so it's something we have to look at. It's something we really have to explore. It's something we really need to kind of take seriously beyond technology, right? Because a platform, a lot of times, people buy the great shiny box, but if you're not implementing it correctly, so I know of a ransomware attack that happened on an organization that actually had the technology in place to stop the attack from happening.
It just didn't configure it correctly, or they didn't.
It wasn't configured correctly. Correct. It didn't have the right configuration. They could have stopped it in its tracks.
Well, and that's actually another interesting piece of this too, is that people think vulnerability management, they think CVEs, they think CVSS, but it's like cloud configurations, vulnerabilities, configuration of your firewall, that's vulnerabilities. That's not CVE scores. But how do you manage that data in line with your business risk and your appetite for risk and everything that you want to do, and who's responsible for it? And so there's a ton of challenges there, but I think we just need to start looking at this more holistically than we're doing some scans and found some CVEs, let's go implement some patch management solution.
Yeah, we live in a time where I think now more than ever, and over the next few years, as we transition more into the cloud, as we transition more into remote work, as our teams interact more through Slack and all these different IMs, that having a committee to deal with this that reports to, they don't have to report directly to the CISO as well. They can report to a senior vice president or a vice president or a director that really is responsible for that team, but ensures that at least they have some level of accountability to vulnerability management. We reduce our risk surface so much by doing that. I mean, the cost of that if you look at the financial cost of, let's say, taking 5 people and having them invest 2 hours a month, that's maybe what, $1,000 a month?
Something like that, yeah.
Maybe. So that's $12,000 a year. The average cost of
they put the interns on it, so that'll be more like $500 a month.
Well, I mean, just say you got 5 higher ups, 5 kind of leaders.
Sure. I was just trying to be funny.
I know.
Sometimes it falls flat. I know.
Well, I mean, I think we're in this part of this conversation where it's what can we do? What can we take back to the business right now to really help us deal with this, right? Because I think that there's inherently, I see, Twitter and Reddit and LinkedIn feeds and all these different people saying, well, right now the most important part is, BYOD and work from home and Wi-Fi networks. And you're like, yeah, we get it, but no business is going to go out and secure a home Wi-Fi network. You're not going to do it.
Yeah. Plus, people need their personal time at home, right? So,
yeah,
I mean, they don't want, most people that I know, especially in this industry, don't want their business to control their home Wi-Fi network. It's just not a reality.
Yeah, can you imagine, like, hey, honey, I got fired today, and by the way, we don't have internet for 2 weeks because AT&T can't come out here and install our
that's right.
Like, I mean, imagine the people who really inherently don't have very good internet.
Yeah, it's already a big challenge for a lot of people to, the pipes don't go to every place in the country, right? Yep. So it's already a problem. I mean, we don't want to exacerbate the loads that we're already experiencing, right? I mean, it goes all the way back to the conversation at the beginning. Infrastructure is kind of tapped out right now. It takes a long time to build that up. When we're building up the internet and the capabilities of the internet, it needs to be this slow, steady process. But when an event like this happens, it's like all of a sudden there's a exponential growth in usage of the internet, and we have yet to see it. I mean, honestly, we're handling it pretty well, all things considered, shifting to like pretty much mostly remote workforce. So I've actually been pretty impressed with the fact that the outages have been as small as they have.
I got to tell you something. I love our country. I love our nation. Europe is falling apart, man. Those guys are crumbling at the seams. I mean, they are. And our nation has risen up to this challenge, and every time this country, people think, oh, this is the end of America. This is the end of America's greatness. This, we heard that in 9/11. We heard that in the economic crash of 2008. We'll never recover. We'll never be back to where we were. And we came back greater, roaring, and better than ever with the best economy this planet has ever seen. And in this challenge, we are seeing the ingenuity, the entrepreneurship, the leadership, the community support that the American people give each other, no matter of race, religion, creed, color. None of that mattered, because for this very moment, for the last, almost we're 47 days into this, more or less.
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that. Everyone's an American, and no matter nothing, everyone's going out and they're buying from local restaurants. They're ordering from local restaurants. They're supporting local business, buying gift cards that they're not going to use for, they know they may not use them for 6 months, but they're buying them now. And that's inherently what's great about our country. And as we kind of wrap up this session on vulnerability management, I could say that while our systems are vulnerable, our people aren't. Our tenacity isn't. Our ability to really withstand this and grow from this is just unfathomable. We will come back, and we will be better than ever, and we will master vulnerability management. We will. It will happen. There'll be automation. Nucleus will be there to support that with what those guys do. Guys, Scott, thank you so much for coming on, man, and being part of the virtual summit. How can people touch base with you?
With me? Well, mainly I like to stick to LinkedIn, just because I don't want to waste too much time on Twitter, because I've got stuff to do. But yeah, LinkedIn, or you can hit us up at our website, and connect with me on LinkedIn is probably the best way, because then you'll be able to connect. We'll be able to have conversations. I'm happy to talk to anybody about vulnerability management, regardless of Nucleus or anything like that. And I just want to say, really do appreciate you having me on the podcast, on the virtual summit here. And I really do agree. I think that America really does come together in times of crisis, and this is one of those. And I think time and again we'll rise above. And War of 1812, Revolutionary War, Civil War, we will come back. It's just a matter of time and sticking together. And I really do appreciate it, man.
Thank you so much, folks. We're going to get through this. There's already a light in the horizon. We're going to reopen America. There's already plans in place, state by state. It's going to start to happen. No matter where you are in this great nation, things are going to get better. And for those watching from internationally, this is going to get better globally, and things will come back to where they were, and it'll be better than ever before, because for this moment, for this period of time, we all forgot about every other thing on this planet and focused on us as human beings. And that brought humanity back to people who may have lost track of that just a little bit in this time. So that's it for this session, folks. So much more in this virtual summit coming up right after this very short break. So don't go anywhere. Stay right back, or you can hit pause and just view this at your pleasure, and go make yourself a cup of coffee, maybe get yourself a sandwich, order from a local restaurant, get yourself something, and support local business so they're able to survive this time as well. That's it for this session, folks. We'll be back with so much more here in just a minute. Until then, I'm James Azar, folks. Scott Kuffer with Nucleus Security. Next session coming up right after this break.
Thanks, everybody.